Welcome back to the Queer Voices Sport podcast, where once again we are joined by a figure from the world of sport and from LGBTQ plus inclusion. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Leigh Armstrong from the Ace Players. Welcome, Leigh.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for reaching out and your interest in the podcast and getting involved. I think potentially, though, I'm late on the scene on this one because I know Sky Sports have already shown some real interest in the club.
Yes, that kind of came out of the blue last year. Within Pride Month, organisations reach out kind of looking for some content, and they just sort of came across us, and we were the first one to get back to them. They have picked up on the story because it had kind of never been told before in all the time that we've been going.
Well, hoping to hear lots more about that story today, and I'm sorry that I'm in Cardiff while you're in London, but that's why, for anyone wondering why the setup's a little bit different today, you're not actually here in our podcast studio in Cardiff. I think it's important to mention at this point, Leigh, as you told me when we first started speaking, that the club started in 1977 and has been running ever since. So we're closing in on your 50th anniversary. I mean, a lot of the clubs I speak to, they've started in the last 10 years or so. It's an amazing achievement for the club to have been around as long as it has.
I mean, it kind of feels like yesterday in some senses, but yeah, I mean, we're now in our 49th year because it started in June 1977, and it is incredible. It doesn't seem like it as time has gone by, but then when you reflect and look back, particularly now there's so many new groups and different types of groups setting up, how sort of unique we were really, and standalone at the time. And we still have members who were there on the first day who are still now coming 48 years later. So, we have actually got first-hand accounts from people who were there at the beginning to turn to and talk with.
That's brilliant to hear. It'd be really fascinating to hear about the history and how the club got set up. First of all, I wanted just to start in the present day and find out about the club's activities at the moment. So I know that you play at the at Shirley Park Lawn Tennis Club. How often does the club get together? How many sessions do you have a week?
We play 52 weeks a year, and we meet every Sunday from 12 to 4. So you don't kind of have to get there at 12, but the session lasts for that 4 hours. And people, we cut rent from the club itself. So they're a rally allies. So they've got that kite mark from Pride in Tennis that demonstrates that they're a supportive host. And they've been very good to us, and we hire 2 courts from them every week. And we sort of get 12, 14, 16 people coming most weeks and playing doubles primarily.
And so are those on outside courts? You said 52 weeks of the year. You're playing outside through the winter, or?
Yeah, it is outside, but we're very fortunate that they have grass courts there as well, which is quite of a unique sell. And in the summer, they do invite us to play on the grass sometimes. And they've recently had 2 clay courts fitted as well. So when they have their club finals and tournament, we either use the grass or the clay, which is not a great hardship other than having to clean your shoes all the time with the clay. But yeah, so 52 weeks a year, always outside, and we kind of play snow, rain, ice, unless it's appalling, then we just carry on.
You said sort of 14 or 16 people coming down to most sessions. Is the club membership made up of more people than that? And you kind of have people that come through different bits of the year, or they come one week and not the other?
Well, I think this is one of the interesting things, because we were getting very low on numbers 2 or 3 years ago. So we moved to Meetup, which is like an app, an event app. And suddenly we were just getting loads of people signing up, but very randomly. So people kind of sign up, they say move to London and sign up to 6 or 8 different groups, but they only actually go to 1 or 2. So they're like a sleeping member. So we sort of like had 250 members, but we only actually ever saw sort of 40 or 50 of those. So it's all got a bit confusing that our membership grew exponentially. But I guess really we've got a core of about 30 to 35 people. And we've recently moved on to Spond. I don't know if you've heard of that, SPOND. Yeah, so that's like the event management tool. And really with that, you have to be invited to join that. So we're only going to really get people who we hear about or know about joining that, because meetup can be a bit random. And you do get quite a lot of robots as well on that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then you said of those members, there's a handful that have been around since the very beginning.
Yeah, so we've got two guys who've been there 48 years, and then myself, who's now in the 42nd year. I've been 1980, beginning of 84, I joined. Another guy who's been there over 40 years. And then three more who've been there 25, 30 years. It's like a core group of 8 or 10 of us who've been around 20 years plus. And then, of course, a whole load of new people who are in their 20s or 30s and have no idea, when you're talking about the tennis players that you loved when you were growing up, any idea about them or who they were or what they played like. And the fact that you played with a wooden racket at the beginning, you know.
I was going to say, I guess that's one of the interesting things about tennis is that it's undergone huge evolutions in that time, where other sports, their equipment maybe hasn't changed as much. So, yeah, lots to talk about and kind of compare from when it started to the modern day.
Yeah, and I think, the people that when I was 20 when I joined the group. So, the people that I knew when I was 20, they were 30 or 40, and they're now like 70 and 80. But they're still sort of knocking around, but they're still playing. So it's a sport you can really play. Our oldest member is 81. It's a sport you can play sort of at any age, and it's very team orientated, and it's quite social. So, and it's sort of fairly easy to pick up it, as long as you've got good hand-eye coordination. And we've got people who are good at table tennis and badminton and volleyball and all who've sort of taken up tennis. So, but it's primarily sociable, and then we play tennis, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's often the case with a lot of the LGBTQ plus inclusive sports clubs, that the main raison d'etre is to bring people together, give people a safe and supportive environment to be in, and then the sport is like a nice addition to that. So it sounds kind of similar there. How's the club been at managing to get newer, younger members in, and do you also have a mix of genders?
Well, this has been one of the big challenges, because although it was like an LGBT group, it was primarily gay men, and that was it for like 40 years. And we had the odd woman here and there, and it was really when sort of sexuality was about sex, and there wasn't really much chat about gender. So there wasn't really, in our earlier years and really up to the last few years, very much talk about difference and how to kind of get different groups of people to join us. And it's sort of very much a visibility thing. So, if you came down, there's a group of sort of gay men playing, and if you're not a gay man, you're non-binary, or you're a woman, or you're bisexual or whatever, then it can suddenly, you don't see yourself. So it's maybe then you don't come back. And so we've always been very friendly and kind of welcoming. But I think it was quite difficult for a while to get people much younger, because we were getting older and older. And so, if you're 25 and you're coming down and it's mainly guys in their 50s, 60s, 70s, although we're very respectful and polite, maybe the guy's thinking, hey, not so sure about that. But we have been very successful in the last 2 or 3 years at getting a real good mix. And of course, it's like everything else. Once you get 1 or 2 25, 30-year-olds, then you get 3 or 4, and then 5 or 6, because they see themselves. And we have got 2 women members, and we have got 2 non-binary players quite recently. And that's been fantastic, and it brings a real difference to the group. So yeah, probably at the moment the group is the diverse it's ever been, and that's quite a statement after 48 years.
Well, that's good to hear that it is as diverse as it's been, and hopefully it continues in that direction. And kind of on that subject, how could someone listening to the pod today who is in South London, in Croydon, and keen to get involved, how could they get in touch with the club and come down to a session?
Well, we were on Instagram. We've got Ace Players Croydon is our Instagram handle. We're also on Spond, and on our Instagram there's a link with a code as to how you can access the group just by invite. And we've got an email address as well, aceplayerscroydon at gmail.com. And I'm easy to find as well, Twitter, Instagram, and when you just sort of Google me, and I'm one of those people that comes up all over the place. So, and I think if you Google Croydon tennis or LGBT tennis, we come up as well quite high.
There might be some people that are aware of you through the Pride in Tennis network. When did the club get involved with Pride in Tennis?
Well, fortunately, the secretary of Pride in Tennis was a member of our club, and so we've always had quite a strong link. And so really we've been with them fairly much from the start, and they were able to sort of help us really expand our base, and we weren't particularly technically minded because, again, most of the guys in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and it's like, okay, we haven't got many people, what do we do? So they've been able to help us. We've done blogs with Pride in Tennis, and they've sort of facilitated meetings with the LTA, and we've done blogs, and obviously then Sky came out of that as well. But Pride in Tennis primarily have been able to support our host club do the Rally Ally seminar, where the host club goes to learn about terminology and about how to help people feel comfortable, and how to help people access the club. And they've been very good. So I think really if people are not that sure what to do, it's best to go to the Pride in Tennis website, because they've got a list of all of the LGBTQ clubs. And then they've also got a list of all of the venues that are LGBTQ friendly. So if you are living miles and miles away from an accessible club, at least when you go down to that club that they've got some kind of affinity, or their committee have done some training. So you'll have a good chance of a good start.
Yeah, it's such an important initiative, that, and hopefully that list of clubs that are signed up to the Rally Allies part of Pride in Tennis will just continue to grow, so that there are more and more places people can play. What did it feel like for you and for other members of the club when you kind of connected with Pride in Tennis and realised, if you weren't already, that there are a number of other clubs around the country also with LGBTQ plus inclusive tennis groups?
Well, I mean, there was always been kind of one or two groups knocking about in London over time, but nationally I didn't really have any knowledge, or there was very few. And I think it's been very interesting to see the groups set up. I've become really friendly with Wes from Dundee Juices, which is quite one of the newest groups in there. And they're very professional, and they've got charitable status, and their policies and procedures and safeguarding, mission statements, all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of professionalism in the new groups. And we were kind of looking around thinking, we've been going 48 years and we don't really even have a bit of paper about what we are. We just are what we are. And so there's that kind of need now for really good sort of safeguarding and support, and professionalism with the groups. And of course, with social media, it's now so much easier for people to access information about groups that just wasn't there before. And a lot of the groups that have set up, I think they're doing really well from a low base. It's the startup that's very difficult, because you're starting from nothing. And often at the beginning, people want, there's all different standards. So, if you have a beginner with 3 people who are quite good, it doesn't quite work. So you need to have lots of beginners, or lots of good players, or lots of intermediate. And so it takes a little while for it all to settle down. But we've been very lucky that when although we're the longest running group, in a way that was the problem, because we were so old fashioned in the way that we did everything. So we reached out to the Manchester Northern Aces and to South London Smashers, and both those groups. So how do you get your members? Where do they come from? How best to advertise? And they were really, really helpful. So we've actually had a lot of help from the newer groups rather than them come to us for help, if you see what I mean.
That's really good to hear, that there's that kind of sharing of knowledge. But let's focus on the fact that you were such a trailblazing group, and go back to the start. I mean, I've spoken to a whole host of different LGBTQ plus inclusive sports groups on the podcast so far, but none of them started as early as 1977. So I imagine at that point there was a real sense. I know you weren't involved right at the very beginning, but even as you became involved, that you were probably part of something that was quite rare, but also was as important as it's ever been to the LGBTQ plus community.
I mean, to find something that where you felt you could kind of be yourself in the 70s was really unheard of, and that there was a really good sense of community then. Um, this thing that they said, that gay community, and you think, yeah, but what actually is that? Does it really exist, and is it tangible? And it was kind of in Croydon where we are. We're part of Croydon Area Gay Society. We were affiliated to that group, and the original members were members of that group. And it was just really some enthusiasts within that group who wanted to play tennis. That's how it started. But I mean, at that time, to have once a week the ability to kind of get together with people like yourself and do something that you enjoy was a really strong thing to be able to do. And there was a very strong sense right from the beginning that the social element was as much as important as the tennis. But I mean, we had, obviously there was no kind of gay marriage, no employment law support, none of that around at all. It was a bit like the Wild West sometimes when we used to go and play down there, as I've explained in the video. But I mean, everybody kind of had a different experience, because some people were more confident, some people more out than others. But I think as a group of people in the beginning, it was really good because we all sort of helped each other along.
The club began in 1977, and 4 years later, the AIDS epidemic really took hold in the UK. The effect that had on the club must have been really difficult. Are you able to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there were half a dozen people in the group that became ill very quickly. And at the time, it was very unclear as to what that was about and why people were getting ill. And also, quite a few of our members weren't that supported by families or weren't accepted by families for their sexuality. So they were quite on their own. And I mean, we had maybe 35, 40 people in the group at that time. So, 5 or 6 people, what was quite a large group of people to get ill and get ill very quickly. And of course, the nature of these things, it wasn't necessarily the most popular people in the group or the people who had lots of friends who became ill. It was often people who were quite new to the group or quite isolated, who suddenly needed a lot of support. And there was a real sort of sense that we really needed to get together and do something about it, because we were supporting people, taking them to hospital appointments, taking them to clinic, and getting them all kinds of different services from the health authority. But it was very, very tough and very difficult to do. And I was really shocked going to visit guys in hospital from the tennis group, and they're being locked in rooms and having their lunch, dinner left outside the room by the staff, and the staff asking you to take in because they were terrified. So that I kind of got that sort of reckless determination about what to do. So, well, these are like, they're tennis friends, they weren't necessarily friends, but this is our community, and this is our colleagues, this is our club. So this is something we need to do. And one of the really prominent guys, who's probably our best player, contracted HIV, went on to develop AIDS and died in New Year's Day, 35 years ago now. And his partner and myself and a few others in the tennis group, we just got together and sort of in his front room a few months later and said, look, we've got to do something about this, because people are dying and there's not really any support for people, and there's not really much education for the health authority staff as about how to manage and support people. So that's really where we got together and set up the Gay Health Link Group, which then went on to become the AIDS Care Education Project. And AIDS Care and Education is ACE, and that's now we've reclaimed that name as the tennis group, the ACE Players. So that's like a whole go-round 35-year turnaround to get the same name back, which is quite sweet. And ACE, of course, is also a tennis phrase. But I mean, we were going from 1987 to 2001, and we helped over 800 people in that time and built 2 community centres from nothing, with no funding at the start. And that was really the tennis group getting together, finding disused maternity hospital storerooms, decorating, painting, furnishing, staffing these places really through our own efforts. And then going on to help support people first in Croydon and then eventually moved to Merton, to a larger place. But this was all without any training, without any necessarily, I remember when we had this first meeting, we all went around the room and one of the guys was a graphic designer, right, you can do leaflets, and one of you's a caterer, right, you can do the catering. And I said, well, I don't really have anything to bring to the table to help this. And Ray said to me, Leigh, you've got a big mouth, you can be fundraising coordinator, you'd be really good at that. So it's that kind of, suddenly we all found something that we were good at that maybe we didn't know. And it wasn't so much about playing tennis anymore. It was about doing lots of other things. But there was still that every Sunday going to tennis and being able to chat through and get support from each other. But by then we were sort of getting together 3, 4, 5 times a week and doing other things on top of tennis. That's like buddy support, helping to staff the centre. A couple of our guys did training, so training people how to buddy, how to volunteer, and also training healthcare professionals as well. So, there's lots of different ways that guys in the tennis group helped other people in that time. And it went on for like 14 years. So
that is absolutely incredible to hear that story and the work that you and the other members of the club were involved with to support people dealing with just an unimaginable illness. And I think it can be hard sometimes for people my age and younger who didn't live through the height of the AIDS epidemic to kind of appreciate just how on your own those of you in the gay community, in the wider LGBTQ plus community were. And you're talking there about it coming from the tennis club and the fact that you were working full time, but you were all putting in those hours to support. Just, as I say, unimaginable. What kind of fundraising did you do at the time?
Well, I mean, one of the great things we did were we set up a theatre group, and so it was a way of people who are HIV positive, their family and friends expressing themselves through drama, which was great for gay guys even at that time. And we just kind of got together and we wrote shows and we did skits and we sold tickets and we did that for 7 years and we raised thousands and thousands just by doing theatre shows. But then also we did a lot of corporate and charitable fundraising as we got going, to get money to fund kitchens and therapy rooms and lunch rooms and then obviously getting support from members as well to donate stuff.
I hope that sometimes you take a moment to reflect and be proud of the difference that you and the others in the club made to so many people's lives at such a difficult time.
It was crucial intervention, I would say, for people who were very vulnerable, often had been disowned by their family, or the families were coming back in at the end and sort of kicking the partner out and then taking over as executor, or because there was no marriage or civil partnership. It was very, very difficult. Even partners who'd been together a long time suddenly found themselves sort of kicked out of properties. So kind of like making really important interventions so someone's able to quickly rent a place, helping them get a sofa, helping them get a television, just small stuff, but all really together helping. And we did do that on a lot of occasions, and often visiting people in hospital that literally had nobody to go and visit them. So I kind of reflect back on the sort of major difference we made to a relatively small amount of people, but I think it's important and significant impact.
Absolutely, an invaluable one. And also, I mean, there's the practical support that you were providing there to the people who were suffering from HIV and suffering from AIDS. But I would imagine emotionally, psychologically, for all of you that were involved in the group, that the club probably contributed massively to your ability to carry on through such a difficult period.
Yes, I think it there was sort of a blotting out in a sense, not being able to process each person who passed away. So that there was this kind of thing within myself, and I know shared by the people, of just sort of carrying on and doing the best we could, but not really having much time to process and grieve about individual people. Maybe some we were closer to, others. The first person I worked with, lived with, slept with, played tennis with, all died, like one after the other, very short space of time. So sort of going to funerals every few weeks, or representing the club at funerals with people we didn't necessarily know very well or hardly at all. So I think it was very difficult to sort of process, but the tennis somehow became more important because there was a normalization about that, that we're still playing our tennis, and that somehow was very important and became more important. And it's kind of interesting, you were talking about kind of people suffering from HIV and suffering from AIDS, and that was kind of the terminology around at the time. And we were really trying to move that on to like living with HIV and living with AIDS, because it all felt like people were being done to, and things was happening to them, rather than being able to take responsibility for their lives and make something of their lives. I mean, we were starting off helping people to die in a more comfortable and easy way, and that is suffering. And then we were helping people with their CVs and how to get jobs when they were getting better again. So, yeah, I can help you with your CV. Job interviews, you're a bit nervous. Yeah, I can help you with that. So really then it became sort of helping people to suffer less, to helping people to live better.
Just going back a little further, can you tell us about how you first heard about the club and the kind of the process you went on to get involved? Because we've had guests on who have talked about joining LGBTQ plus inclusive clubs these days, and the amount of doubts they have going into it, the kind of number of people that they speak to about whether they should get involved, and it being quite a big decision. But I imagine, going back to the 70s for the first people joining and yourself in the 80s, that must have been magnified by a massive amount.
Yeah, I mean, we were very lucky that Croydon always had quite a strong gay scene, really, even in the 80s. Quite a few pubs and clubs and Croydon Area Gay Society. And one of the other things I started with my flatmate was Croydon Area Gay Youth, or KG as we called it. And we set up a youth group, again, 40 odd years ago, nearly 40 years ago. And we used to put in little notes in newspapers, like little tiny little notes with PO boxes. And that kind of thing. So you'd send a postcard or, a note to a PO box. And we would go and meet people at West Croydon or East Croydon Station. Absolutely no idea whether they're going to have an axe in their hand or what's going to happen. And, it was mad when you think about it. But we did a lot of really good work, particularly with younger people, again, some of whom we're still in contact with now in their late 50s, early 60s. So that was kind of one way of getting people through. And then we'd meet every Tuesday and we'd have 25, 30 people in a one-bedroom flat coming round. So, if you found something, you really stuck with it. I think that was the important thing. So pubs and clubs locally, there was a very good gay scene in Streatham in South London as well. So we're able to sort of get quite a few members from there. I was really lucky that my best friend, who's still my best friend, who's still in the group, I met when I was 15. And again, like a lot of people, it was quite difficult family life at the time. And family felt that there was, it was a lifestyle choice to be gay. And they're saying, well, if you want to live that lifestyle, then you need to move. And to move out. And so very early I moved. I was before my 18th birthday. And I went to live with Ricky as a friend. So I didn't really have very much in the way of support. But the family had always played tennis. Even banging the ball against the wall at home, against the garage door sort of thing. So the family were always quite sporty, and we like cricket, we like tennis, anything sort of bat and ball orientated. And Ricky had been in the group, of course, by then for a few years. And he said, well, why don't you come along down one Sunday? And I was the worst player at the start, of course. And then gradually, as things went on, things changed around. And we entered, we used to have tournaments in the club. And we entered for 40 years the doubles tournaments, and we managed to win a trophy in 5 different decades, Ricky and myself. So that's quite a unique sort of achievement.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was going to say I did see in the Sky documentary that there seemed to be a few pictures of you holding trophies and shields. So yeah, you obviously made quite a big improvement from where you started.
Well, I think Ricky and I, Ricky is got to 40 finals, and I think 38 finals, and we'd have like summer and winter tournaments. So that was over a very long period of time. But yeah, doubles players, we were always instinctively really good together. And I was never in the top 3 or 4 people in the group, but somehow did better than I should have done because of that getting the ball back sort of philosophy. But Ricky and I always like played well together. And it's quite funny now because when guys come down and they play us and they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and it's like we're older than both of them combined. And then we kind of beat them 6-2 and they're like looking at like, how is this possible?
Well, like you said earlier on, tennis is such a lifelong game. And then, I mean, there's so many different ways to play it, and it's a real strategy game, isn't it? So I imagine your experience from winning in 5 different decades comes in incredibly handy.
Well, we say that, you become very crafty as you get older and you get that kind of knowledge. You do a drop shot, then you do a lob, then you do a wrong footer, or, and you've got to sort of work out a bit like snooker when you're 5 or 6 ahead. But Ricky and I are always saying to each other, like, we played together on Sunday, and he said, like, 20 years ago, you'd have got that back. And he said, yeah, 30 years ago, I'd have got it back and I'd have hit a winner, But it's like, now we've just got to get to the ball is the first priority. But I think guys kind of, they get a lot of inspiration from kind of meeting us. We had a new player on Sunday, and they just can't believe that the club's been going that long. And that there's people who were there at the beginning that are still in the club. And this is inspirational for people.
What do you think is the club's secret to retaining those members? Why have people continued to be a member all that time?
There wasn't really anything else to do when we joined. So, there was no Sunday trading. There was all the sport was on a Saturday. All the football was 3:00 on a Saturday kind of thing. So there's nothing to do on a Sunday. No shopping, no sport, no social media, no iPads, no phones. So, if it rained, so, oh God, well, what are we going to do today? You might phone your mate on a dial-up phone and speak to them for an hour on the phone, possibly. That was something that we would do. But I think so that it's interesting now that a lot of the new members come once or twice a month, if that. Or they'll come 3 or 4 times a year. They'll come every year, but 3 or 4 times a year. So it's a whole different ball game now. So you need a much bigger pool of people to get that 12, 14, 16 every week. Whereas in the old days, it was like sort of 25 of us, and 20 of us came every week unless we were on holiday or ill, and that was it. But now you need a much bigger pool of people, and it's absolutely fantastic. But I think the relevance thing, we've been through sort of periods where we have questioned why we're still there, but there does still seem that need for a group like ours. It's quite hard to quantify and to be clear about the reasons for it. But I felt originally when we were playing in the group that it was about fitting in. And now it's very much about standing out. So that's kind of been the huge arc. So, we'd go down to the club, I'd take my bracelets off, I'd take my camp chains off, I'd wear my dark clothes. I wouldn't dye my hair. I would try and look straight, which was hard playing tennis because you can't put your hands in your pockets, and I was all sort of camp and flowery. But, it's all about fitting in, putting on a deep voice, and hopefully the people on our court would get off without too much aggro. And now it's just great. You can just be yourself. Be your authentic self is the new phrase, I think, isn't it? And that has real value and meaningfulness. And I still think that's an important thing for the younger people when they're coming down. To just be able to, what did you do at the weekend? And it's that thing when you join a sports club and you sign up as a member at a gym and someone says, what did you do at the weekend? You think, is this the time that I say I've got a boyfriend, or do I say partner, or, when do I drop it in, or how do I drop it in, or do I feel safe? Whereas with us, you just say it and just do what you want, be what you want, talk about who you fancy on the tennis circuit. And that is so good to have that kind of permission without needing to ask.
Yeah, I think until all of us in the community feel like we can have those conversations, wherever you might speak to someone, those inclusive spaces, those safe spaces are always going to be important, and arguably are growing in importance at the moment with the attacks that we're seeing on the trans community in politics, in the media. And so with the kind of newer members that you've got in the group, are they involved in a sort of committee aspect in order to help ensure that the club is continuing to be as supportive now for the community as it so obviously was in the 80s and 90s?
Well, that it's really funny you should say that, because that's one of the kind of things, changes we've been going through at the moment, looking at the makeup of our committee. And at the time, I think we were like 81, 78 and 63. And it was, well, okay. So we need to maybe do something about that. And then we were really lucky that we had two of the younger guys who live fairly local, because you needed to if you could be on the committee to live in Croydon, because you might open up, lock up. There's nobody having someone who's miles away. And a couple of guys joined us, and they're 29, 31. So it's actually super for us. But it's that kind of, I'm learning all the time, and I make mistakes. But I still got that ability to learn how to say things and how to do different things. And, we have a non-binary player come down. It's like, right, remember about pronouns. Remember they, them. Remember, and then the first thing my mate says, like, oh, she's got a really good backhand, hasn't she? So, no, isn't she? They identify as they, them. And it's like, queer has come back as a word. This is a word that my age group found quite offensive, and we wanted to lose that. And that's now coming in, and the younger guys use that. And so, again, it's like, the Back to the Future thing, about how things change in terminology and about learning things. So it's really great, the new guys coming in and they're sitting down saying, right, Leigh, this is where we need to go, and this is how we need to do things, and this is maybe how we need to speak, and it might be different from before. But I think if you're open to learning, then it's okay. It's if you stop learning, or then that becomes more difficult. And it isn't easy, and I don't find it necessarily easy to do, but I'm willing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key for so many people, isn't it? To have that willingness and to have that compassion and empathy to understand that it's important to people to show that you will learn and to make those changes to your language and, in some cases, behaviours to ensure that people feel safe and they feel included.
Yeah, and I think, some gay people can be discriminatory, as much as any other part of society. I find it more disappointing sometimes if they are, because you feel that some of the stuff I talked about earlier, that therefore that you would hope there'd be more empathy. But that is a challenge that we do have. And as hearing what you're saying about politically, you feel like there's one or two steps all the time backwards that we could go very quickly. Looking at what's happening in America as well, that we could lose some things. So it could become very important, especially when you hear about the language that people are coming out with and taking down the pride flags and stopping DEI training and all these sort of things that are happening. So, well, that's the beginning of the slippery slope back again. And with the tennis group, we have been through a lot of homophobia at the start, good recovery, dreadful homophobia with the HIV project, good recovery, and then challenge again now, hatefulness towards trans community. So it doesn't take much, and there's always something new and different for people to say that they don't want.
I guess that experience that you've had as the club through those periods is where, earlier you were talking about learning from some of the more recently established clubs, but actually an area where they can learn so much from the ace players is understanding how you survived and how you evolved through such adversity in the 80s and the 90s.
I think you're right. The richness is the clubs being able to learn from each other, and that's the main strength of Pride in tennis. I think that you've got all these different groups, different parts of the country. Some have been going longer than others, but the newer groups are actually bringing something to the table around structure and status, particularly. I mean, we don't have any status really at all. We're just a group of volunteers playing together. So it's pretty remarkable. You know, we don't have a constitution. We've managed to get a mission statement together after 47 years. That's the first document we've ever had. But it's kind of hard when you've been doing something so long. You say, well, what are we actually doing? Why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? What's the outcome of what we're doing? What's the preferred outcome? And it's actually quite hard to sit down and write that down.
Yeah, I guess when something started as just a few people coming together to play tennis, I mean, firstly, the guys there at the start probably wouldn't have believed that almost 50 years later the club would still be going, would still be providing this level of support to the community.
It is pretty unique, but there is a lot of work still to do. And in terms of relevance, I think we are still relevant. But hopefully one day we won't be needed. I mean, I guess, is that the aim? Is that the aim at the end, that we don't actually need to be there?
We've talked about that with other clubs that have come on, yeah, whether ultimately we get to a point where we live in such an equal and inclusive society that there is no need for groups like this, in a way that feels so far off right now that you'd imagine the importance of groups like the Ace Players is going to continue long into the future.
Well, I think this concept of allies and allyship still feels fairly new, but I mean, the LGBTQ plus, the plus is quite important, and it's often undersold in that respect. That plus can kind of mean anybody else, and I mean, sometimes we have 7 players or 11, and we're looking at the main club that finish at 12. Say any of you guys want to come and play with us and make up a number, and people don't run away, and people come and join us and help us out. And that club at Shirley Park Lawn Tennis Club is really, really supportive. But so guys, why don't you come and play on the grass? It's not tokenism. They invite us to their quiz nights and their fundraising, and we have drinks in the bar with them. And interestingly, also their members have joined our group, and our members have joined their groups. There's been quite good crossover. So I think the plus is important.
Had that always been the case, or were there times through the club's 48-year history where there have actually been challenges with where you're playing?
But I mean, certainly at the start, we played on public courts, and even the park staff weren't that friendly, to be honest. They're kind of like the regular income, and they had a like group of staff, so there wasn't the same people there every week. 1 or 2 of them were really friendly, but 1 or 2 of them are really not friendly. So you'd feel quite intimidated playing, and they wouldn't ask people to move off the court when it was your time. People would throw stones at us. People would let our tyres down. There was that kind of thing going on, and I felt quite intimidated a lot of the time. But I would go down in the car with my friend. I'd never get like a train and walk down or a bus down. So we kind of felt okay if we were there and on there, but and not everyone experienced the same levels, and not everyone felt the same. But one of the problems I've found now is I find it difficult to realise that is no longer the case so much. So I'm a bit still timid in terms of how I interact, and too visual. So, I look at a gut club and think, oh, blimey, he looks a bit straight, because that's sort of how this is where your fight or flight comes in. Shall I talk to them? Shall I not? And of course, everyone's generally quite friendly. So, but it's more the problem is now me thinking that they might have a problem rather than them having a problem. And again, not everyone my age feels that, but that is a bit of a leftover, I think, from when we were growing up. You were streetwise and you kind of ducked and dived, and you realise who were the right people and who weren't the right people just by looking.
That, in some cases, internalised homophobia, but also just lack of confidence that you're going to be welcomed in a particular environment, and wariness that actually it could be an openly hostile environment. Is that something that as a member of the club, you have had the opportunity to talk to with other members and kind of help each other sometimes work through?
Yeah, and we've had lots of debates about this because I did a blog for the LTA, and it's the first one I'd done, and I was getting the first person and the third person confused quite a lot through that blog. And at the end of it, it was kind of felt like I was speaking for everybody rather than speaking for myself some of the time. And of course, everybody's experience is different. An individual. So we didn't have arguments as such, but it promoted an interesting debate about, you can't make an assumption that every 25-year-old feels comfortable with their sexuality or every 60-year-old doesn't, or so it's all mixed up. And there's still guys coming down to the groups who didn't come out to their late 20s, early 30s for whatever reason, relevant to them, and they found us, and they're absolutely loving it, which is fantastic. But yeah, I've kind of learnt the lesson of this speaking for I and speaking for the group and trying to untangle that, because that can get a bit messy.
In a way, I think it's quite nice to be able to think my experience is completely unique to me. There's lots of things that each of us has in common with other members of the LGBTQ community, just as we have in common with cishet people, but yeah, to know that your experience is unique, even though for me, I'm one of those people who you mentioned there who came out in their late 20s, and so I've got something in common with them, but I don't know what it's like to live as an openly queer man in my early 20s, or to live in that situation in the 2000s, the 90s, the 80s, and so on.
I left home at a very young age, and my family weren't very supportive at the time. They are very supportive now, which is great. And we've had all the conversations over time, and we've got to where we've got to. But one of the things Mum said to me, Mum's still around, and she said she took me to the doctor, and the doctor said I would grow out of it. That was the advice from the healthcare professional in the late 60s, early 70s. And of course I didn't. And so that then became a problem. But I guess for Mum, it was like that, looking through a magazine of lifestyles, and I picked this, that I could have chosen a different type of lifestyle. And so that was where the problem was at then. But there was something also coming out at that age, at that time, that made me very steely and kind of determined and streetwise.
When you reflect on your own journey with your sexuality and your life to this point, what would you describe the role that the Ace Players has had on your journey in your life, your identity?
I think it's been crucial for me, and it's fundamental in terms of my security and my sort of grounding right through my life, because I joined at 20 and I'm nearly 63 now. So, it's been right through my adult life, and it's been a constant thing right through changes in relationships, changes in family dynamics and housing and employment and all the discrimination and all the challenges that we've had. But it's always been there. And a few of us have played together for all of that time. So it has been a fundamental thing. And I kind of think about, if someone's 15, 16 years old, and in 10 years' time, they're going to need us. We're going to still be there. So it's not necessarily even for the people now. It's for the people who are still like teenagers, still at school. So it's going to be like my last push, I guess. Sounds a bit morbid. I don't mean it quite like that. It's going to be that kind of legacy thing. It needs to be carrying on when I'm not going. That's going to be the most important thing, because those guys that have recently joined us, who've been around for 2 or 3 years and come, 2 or 3 times a month or whatever, it's really important to them, and they love it. And to see them grow and develop, it's absolutely fantastic. Although we have all these confusing discussions about Lady Gaga and Dua Lipa and all the modern tennis players.
Yeah, you kind of talked there about legacy and the future. I guess, having been involved with the club for so long, where would you like it to be as it approaching 50 years running now? Where would you love the club to be when it's approaching 60?
Well, I guess in the short term, one of the things that is kind of getting our story out there, and also about recognition, because I think when we are coming up to our 50th, we need to maybe look at sort of LTA and Out in Sport and Gadio and those kind of organisations to try and get some kind of recognition, because I think our profile is still quite low. And quite limited. And it seems to be now, the South London Smashers were talking the other day, they get most people through Instagram. So we set an Instagram account, but we're a bit behind the times in terms of that. So I think definitely to raise our profile, definitely look for the 50th at sort of celebratory type stuff, but also recognition stuff, and then move ourselves forward. And then really in 10 years' time, there needs to be kind of an equal effort around sustainability and development, because you need to sustain to be able to develop. People move, they move away, people sadly have died and all that sort of thing. And then it's hard these days to find people who want to commit to being volunteers to run the group. I've been on the committee for 34 years without time off for good behaviour, through all the dramas and the difficulties. And, we've had times where good players don't want to play with people who are improving and they only want to play with other good players, and we've had to knock that on the head, and there's been fallouts and dramas. But I would say, as long as we keep going with that social aspect of in being important, and then people playing tennis, but it's a social group of people that play tennis, get a better profile, modernise up to an extent. But one of my really good friends said the trouble is, Lee, it's become a bit about sort of numbers and politics and profile, but you need to just have fun as well and play and have a good time. And that's also important. So I'm pretty sure we'll be going in 10 years' time, but maybe that next year or two could be quite important on the 50th about how we get the message out.
That's what I wanted to ask you about next. What kind of celebrations do you reckon that the club is going to have for such a brilliant milestone?
Well, we even had a little argument the other day about 50th year or 50th anniversary, and they're two sort of different things. So we thought we're going to start our celebrations from the beginning of our 50th year, which means we've been going 49 years, which is June next year. So we've got a few ideas. We're going to play a tournament at each venue we've played at in the last 50 years. So go back to the places we've played and have one-day tournaments in all. I think there's 6 different venues we've played at. So that's
that
one
sounds really good
thing. That would be cool, and see how the courts are. We are only about 5 miles from Wimbledon. So,
I like where this is going.
Yeah, I like where this is going. There's a couple of snags. The LTA don't run Wimbledon. The Grand Slams are run by, their own sort of committees and organisations. But I think the LTA will be quite supportive of us in our 50th year, because it's a great story for them. They've been very supportive. So I kind of think, there's events at Eastbourne, at Queen's Club and that. So I'm pretty sure there'll be something going on, even if it's... I've done the Billie Jean Cup a year ago. I tossed a coin sort of thing. There'll be those sort of opportunities. Hopefully some sort of recognition awards, which should be quite important, I think, for us. Bound to be parties, bound to be. We've had them for like a 25th, 30th, 40th, 45th, and it's like all the same people, and we just got pictures of us getting older as time goes by. So there'll be all that, and probably an open day at the club as well, I would think. So I'm pretty sure we won't be lost in it. We'll do something really good, and it'll be impactful is the word.
I'm sure it will be impactful, and I think it'll be hopefully just an incredible year to be a part of, and for you to be able to look back on the journey that the club's been on, the journey that you've been on as part of it. And I really hope that the LTA gets behind the celebrations and puts some things on, because it does seem to be such an obvious positive news story for the LTA to recognise that this club has been going for 50 years.
Well, I mean, Pride Month. I mean, you know what it's like. You're going to Sainsbury's or other supermarkets, and they've got the rainbow banners up, or the banks have put happy to serve our LGBT customers, and it goes up every June. And it's like, yeah, but what about the other 11 months? And I'll go into Sainsbury's and I'll sort of say, yeah, well, you've got these like banners up, and think, do I get 10% off because I'm from the LGBT community? No, you don't, but. It's sort of, so I think it's an easy win sometimes, that every June we'll get requests and people will seek us out. And a really good, easy win is going to get an LGBT tennis group that's been going 50 years. If you want to major that on your BBC News Pride Month.
That thing of... everyone suddenly is very aware of the LGBTQ plus community in June, and then it dies down again. And the frustration that many of us in the community have about that is surely one that the LTA can understand, because everyone gets really interested in tennis when Queen's happens, and then obviously leading into Wimbledon, that's essentially the Pride Month for tennis, and then the interest tends to drop off again. So there's actually a real common ground there. That the LTA ought to be able to appreciate him. I wish you well for that incredible 50th year, and well done to you and to everyone else that's been involved with the club for so long, to have been, as I said at the start, trailblazers in this area, and to have kept the club going this long. It's an incredible contribution that you've made to the LGBTQ plus community just in that respect. And then when you add in the support that you provided to people living with HIV/AIDS and the money you raised there, just incredible.
Well, it's really kind of you to say thank you very much. And there has been quite a few of us involved right from the start who are still around. And it is that keeping going. Sometimes people say, oh, you've got to do is sort of book the courts and turn up and that's it. Well, it feels like that, but there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes and keeping going. And people do have difficult times. And I'm always, I haven't seen you for a month, haven't seen you for a while, are you okay? And it's all that sort of background stuff that is the strength of the group that keeps it going. So nobody is bigger than the group, and the strength of the group is the group itself. And let's just hope it carries on for many years to come.
Absolutely. We hope that. All the best, Leigh, and thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And thank you very much to you for joining us for this episode of the Queer Voices Sport podcast, as we heard from the incredible Leigh Armstrong, who has been involved with the Ace Players in Croydon for over 40 years now. If you are interested in getting involved with the club, do reach out on Instagram, as Leigh mentioned, and we look to see them continue to grow from strength to strength in the years to come. Let us know as well whether you enjoyed this format of the episode, a virtual one. If you did, then it does allow us the opportunity to speak to more clubs across the UK, and who knows, maybe even internationally. We will be back on Spotify and YouTube, and as always, you can follow along on Instagram and TikTok.